You know, when we think about the world's most powerful empires, we generally assume they were built on things like missiles, massive armies, or maybe the spread of democracy. But when you really dive into the historical sources, they reveal a completely different, almost hidden architecture, one that literally dictates how nations fight, trade, borrow, and just survive every single day. So, in today's Explainer, we're going to unpack the ultimate financial weapon that actually made America the center of the modern world. Trust me, once you understand this, you are absolutely never going to look at global politics the exact same way again. Let's dive right in.
To start us off, we really have to ask a super fundamental question. What actually backs the US dollar today? Like, what gives this specific currency its immense, unshakable global dominance? Why on earth does a little piece of green paper hold so much weight everywhere from Tokyo to London to Buenos Aires?
If you ask most people on the street, you'd probably get answers like, oh, it's our massive gold reserves, or it's our unmatched military might, right? But the surprising reality, and the huge geopolitical twist here, is that the true anchor of the US dollar is actually oil. Almost every single barrel of oil on Earth is bought using just one currency, the US dollar. And it's not necessarily because it's the strongest currency or because folks just inherently trust America the most. It's actually because of a very specific, carefully orchestrated historical deal.
Okay, so to understand how this all happened, we kind of have to jump back in time a bit. For decades after World War II, under the 1945 Bretton Woods system, the US dollar was directly linked to gold. Any country holding dollars could just exchange them for physical American gold. It meant total trust and stability. But by the 1960s, America had a really expensive problem on its hands. The Vietnam War, Cold War military spending, and massive social welfare expansion required a lot of money. And printing dollars was infinitely easier than finding actual gold in the ground, so America just kept printing. Well, countries like France and Germany started noticing the rapidly shrinking gold reserves and basically said, hey, we'd like our gold back now. Imagine the absolute panic in the Nixon administration. If everyone asked at once, the whole system would completely collapse. So on August 15, 1971, President Nixon shocked the world and just shut the gold window entirely. The dollar was officially detached from gold.
Just like that, suddenly the dollar was backed by absolutely nothing except faith. Imagine your bank telling you your entire life savings are perfectly safe and then simply adding, just trust us. That was suddenly the terrifying reality for the entire global economy. The world grew extremely nervous, confidence dropped, and inflation just started rising rapidly. The global financial system was incredibly fragile at this point.
And then, well, things got substantially worse. In October 1973, the Yom Kippur War began, with Egypt and Syria launching a surprise attack on Israel. The United States quickly stepped in to support Israel with a massive airlift of weapons. And in retaliation, furious Arab oil-producing nations realized they actually had the perfect weapon. Not bombs, but oil. OPEC cut production and launched a devastating oil embargo right at the United States. Look at that number right there, $12. That might sound super cheap today, but back then, the embargo caused oil prices to absolutely explode from around $3 a barrel to nearly $12, practically overnight. Imagine your gas bill quadrupling by tomorrow morning. When oil stops, literally everything stops. Transportation, factories, food delivery, gas stations ran dry. Cars were lined up for blocks. America, the largest economy on Earth, was totally trapped with a goldless dollar, soaring inflation, and severe gas shortages. It was a full-blown national emergency, and America desperately needed a new plan. It needed a new anchor for the dollar, something stronger than gold and something so essential that the world would have absolutely no choice but to keep using US dollars.
All right, moving into Section 1, the secret Saudi deal.
Enter U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. He was a geopolitical strategist who realized that if America couldn't back the dollar with gold anymore, it had to back it with absolute necessity. And nothing was more necessary than oil. Kissinger went over to Saudi Arabia, the kingdom sitting on the largest pool of oil on Earth. Saudi Arabia obviously had the oil, but what they desperately needed was security. So America made this brilliant, world-changing offer right in the middle of the desert in 1974. The U.S. would provide military support, advanced weapons, and full protection of Saudi oil fields. In return, Saudi Arabia had to do just two things. First, sell its oil only in U.S. dollars, and second, invest its excess profits right back into U.S. Treasury bonds, security in exchange for total financial loyalty. Soon after, the rest of OPEC followed suit, and boom, the petrodollar was officially born.
This birthed a truly brilliant, self-sustaining loop known as petrodollar recycling. Here's how it works. Step 1. Oil is priced in dollars, forcing literally every country on Earth to hold US dollars just to survive and keep their lights on. Step 2. Oil exporting nations suddenly find themselves with mountains of dollars, way more than they can ever spend, so they invest those excess profits right back in the U.S. Treasury bonds and American banks. Step 3. America then uses that returning massive pool of money to fund its own government spending, massive military budgets, and national debt. And that very military power is then used to protect the whole oil system. It is honestly a perfect, perpetual loop that created permanent global demand for U.S. currency without America ever needing to own the oil itself. Because of this unstoppable machine, America gained what economists like to call an exorbitant privilege. That's the ability to just print money, borrow endlessly, run massive deficits, and push the resulting economic pain, like inflation, right onto the rest of the world. Because everyone needed dollars to buy oil, demand for U.S. debt stayed artificially high, allowing America to borrow super cheaply. It essentially handed the United States a limitless global credit card while the rest of the world picked up the tab. But, as you might guess, there is a much darker implication to this kind of financial dominance. When a currency becomes the mandatory infrastructure for global survival, banking, and trade, it transforms into an incredibly potent geopolitical weapon.
Which brings us to Section 2, the weaponization of money.
The truth is, sometimes it just needs paperwork. One signature and an entire economy just stops breathing. Because literally everything, international payments, shipping finance, central bank reserves, runs through the dollar system. Being removed from it is basically like being kicked off the global financial internet. Your money becomes totally trapped. Imports collapse. If America wanted to punish a nation, it didn't always need to deploy troops or drop bombs. It just needed to revoke access to the dollar.
Historically speaking, challenging this system has proven to be incredibly risky. Take a look at this. In 2000, Iraq announced it was going to sell oil in euros. 3 years later, it was invaded and oil sales immediately returned to dollars. Libya's Gaddafi actually proposed a gold dinar to replace the dollar in African oil trade. In 2011, NATO intervened and that plan completely disappeared. Venezuela attempted a crypto-backed system to bypass the dollar, resulting in heavily increased sanctions. Now, to be perfectly clear and completely impartial here, none of these conflicts happened for just one single reason. There were deep regional tensions, intense political instability, and major humanitarian arguments involved in all of them. But a very complex historical pattern clearly emerges when nations attempt to bypass the petrodollar infrastructure. For decades, nobody could truly break the dollar's grip. It was just too powerful and too deeply embedded. But you know, empires and financial systems don't stay untouched forever.
And that leads us to Section 3, cracks in the system.
We are actually starting to see some real systemic vulnerabilities in the petrodollar's once unbreakable armor. The biggest modern crack happened pretty recently. The 2022 freezing of hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian foreign reserves, alongside cutting major Russian banks completely off from the SWIFT payment network, acted as a massive, massive catalyst. It sent a stark, honestly terrifying warning to governments everywhere. Your money is only yours until Washington disagrees. Sovereign nations watched this play out and quickly realized that if it could happen to a major global power like Russia, it could absolutely happen to anyone.
So this catalyst has sparked what we can call a quiet rebellion. We're seeing Brazil and China exploring trade in their own local currencies. India has been buying Russian oil using rupees. Central banks worldwide are currently hoarding gold at absolute record speeds. And perhaps most significantly of all, Saudi Arabia, the very nation that helped create the petrodollar back in 1974, has publicly stated it is now open to trading in currencies beyond the dollar. Let me tell you, if Saudi Arabia moves, the entire world listens.
But there is another, perhaps even larger long-term threat to consider here: the rapid rise of electric vehicles, the massive growth in renewable energy like solar and wind, and huge leaps in battery and hydrogen tech. The future might not actually run on oil forever. And the simple logic is just this: if the world eventually stops running on oil, it inherently becomes way less dependent on the financial system built specifically to buy and sell that oil in US dollars.
Now, don't get me wrong. This doesn't mean the petrodollar is just dying tomorrow. The dollar still overwhelmingly dominates global finance, world trade, and central bank reserves. But for the very first time in 50 years, this massive machine has real competition. The shift isn't happening with one dramatic explosion. It's happening through 1,000 silent decisions. A trade deal signed in yuan over here, an oil contract settled in rupees over there, a central bank choosing to hold gold instead of dollars. These are small moves, sure, but they carry massive, world-altering consequences.
The petrodollar system created one of the absolute greatest financial empires in all of human history. But at the end of the day, every system built by humans can be changed by humans. So I really want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. What happens when the world no longer needs permission to trade? Because when that day comes, the fundamental rules of global power will be completely rewritten. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and always keep questioning the systems around you.